So the reason of this panel is if you are interested in any aquaculture, especially seaweed farming, this is a chance to ask questions to the panelists. So let's start with Nick. Yeah, come on in. And we ask each panelist to tell us about themselves and their companies that they are representing.
Sweet. I got a pointer. Hi, my name's Nick Mangini. I live in Kodiak, Alaska, which is right here. That little marker, oyster, or they kind of look like butterflies, whatever that is my farm in Kodiak, Alaska. Currently, there's 5 active farms in Kodiak, Alaska that are just kelp-based, but a lot of these points along this map represent both oyster and aquatic plant production sites. Obviously, it started as oyster production because oyster production actually predates the state of Alaska's statehood. I was one of the first 3 farms in Alaska that started in 2016, and since we have about 30 active farms, although a lot of those farms are very, very niche and small. The farmers in Kodiak have been blessed with markets since the beginning of our production in Alaska, so we've kind of outproduced the rest of the state, except for this site right here has put a massive amount of investment into their fully integrated business. So they have had years where they produced about 700,000 pounds. Our greatest year for Alaska as a state was about 1.2 million pounds of kelp, and that was mostly spread between 5 active farms. So it's not really represented very well in this graph, but that's kind of where we started. I kind of wanted to give you guys a little bit of an idea of what the farms look like because they don't really exist here like they do in Alaska. So let's see if I can figure out how to go to the next one. It's kind of pointing at stuff. I wonder if I can go like that. No. I don't know. Oh, there you go. Okay, so this is my farm site. I realize that this picture probably means very little to most of you because you've not been to Kodiak, Alaska. But the harbor that you see there is actually home to most of the bigger, larger crab vessels that you would see on Deadliest Catch and things like that. We have one of the biggest harbors in all of the nation as far as working boats. So they're mostly fishing vessels. It's home to about 900 boats that fish year-round. So a lot of my mission and the reason that I got into this industry was to try to find things to do during the shoulder seasons between fisheries. I was a commercial fisherman for 20 years, and the fisheries that I relied on slowly kind of just started to disappear or just be greatly reduced as far as like the amount of fish we could catch or the amount of time we were allowed to be spending fishing, which kind of go hand in hand. I think that kelp farming actually provides a ton of opportunity for these boats to be used in a lot less intensive ways to both harvest, haul, and transport kelp to the docks. So this is our hatchery setting. I just put this together. We've come a long way since then, thanks to organizations like Greenwave. They just set up a really like state-of-the-art hatchery in Kodiak. But this is where we started in a small cooler in a NOAA facility. This is some seeding of my farm. So if you could see over here on this picture, it's cold and not a great time of year for this, but I think that's part of what really helps the kelp grow so well. This is the boat that we both use for seeding and for harvesting. And this is my farm site. And back in here, that's like our local airport. You can see there's some wind energy production here, but Kodiak City is located right in this area. So I'm fairly close to town, which has given me the ability to be on the farm a lot, and it saves me a lot of time and money just getting to the farm, which isn't the case for a lot of farms in Alaska. We're seeding 5 lines at once. It depends, on your knowledge with farming, but you can see here how close together my lines are, and you'll see in a couple slides here in a minute the reasoning for that. This set design came from Tend Ocean, and it was kind of the brainchild of a Department of Energy RPE project that started out to look at making biofuels and then very quickly turned into a lot of different things. How close together we could grow kelps, predominantly sugar kelp. In this area between these 2 buoys here, it's about 150 feet, and you'll see some diagrams later, but I've got about 55 grow lines in there. All of these lines are 400 feet long and can produce quite a bit. We've had almost 4,000 pounds come off of a 400-foot line before. We don't always see that. A lot of it's dependent on the weather. And like last year, we had a really dark, cold, wet winter, and we had very stunted growth. But I saw that across almost all of Alaska. So this is more of a diagram of what the site looks like. We're required to lease the entire area of where our anchors are. So my production array actually is only about 4.8 acres of my entire 17-acre site. So I'm unable to utilize a lot of this area, although we're working on ways to do things there. Like I've got some oyster production happening in this area for a research project. I'd really like to look at other species of kelp, although I'm taking a large step back from the 5 species that I farmed last year to just focus on growing one well again because I was kind of getting spread way too thin. This is a picture of my site from the air, just to give you a better idea. This was using some spreader bars that I've since went away from for a number of reasons. I don't really like having metal in the water, was one of them. Number 2, it's really hard to pick up 5 lines at once when they've got a lot of kelp on them. And so we tried a number of different things. But Tend Ocean sells this site and will design sites for people. Really well engineered stuff. We've since started kind of designing our own stuff as well, using similar techniques, but more catered to like a fisherman's point of view, which I think is some reason that I brought a lot of the reason I got into this. This is some topwater views of what the kelp looks like. This was, about a month in or something, and then this is right before harvest of about 250,000 pounds on that 4 acres. So I just like to show those slides. All of this kelp is about 7 to 10 feet underwater, and as you can see, it requires a lot of flotation, which we're trying to get away from using these big bright orange buoys because that's been about the biggest pushback we've got, is that I don't like looking at that. So selling that to the general public has been tricky, and that's what they're running into on the East Coast a lot. These are just some pictures of our harvest time. This is where we started here. We were just using an engine to drive down the lines and harvesting 1 line at a time. Over here, this boat's about 22 feet wide. That's 5 lines at once, and we did about 10,000 pounds in an hour and a half. We've since stepped back from doing it that way because it was a lot of work. And it's a lot of material to mess with at once. We ended up losing quite a bit of kelp just because we were trying to do it so quickly. And now that we're trying to meet market demands and actually be successful, we'd like to not lose it. At this point in time, a lot of this was actually just getting given away in the community because we didn't have markets for it. So it was easier to do R&D around our harvest. And that is all I've got. That's a lot about Alaska's production.
Thanks, Nick. So, yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Cindy Wilcox, and great to see everybody this morning, and thank you to the Seaweed Festival for hosting. I love Nick's talk. I just want to say that we are one of those ARPA-E funded projects for seaweed. And thank you to all of you as taxpayers. We hope you appreciate that we used your money well. The company's Marine Bioenergy, we came into this from growing abundant kelp for fuel. That can vary. So as many of you know, fossil fuels need to be replaced. They, depending on who you're talking to, approximately, fossil fuels provide 75% of the energy in the US today. That's including vehicles on the road plus the grid. A third of all energy used is liquid fuels. Long-haul trucks, ships, and planes have been some of the hardest to convert to renewable fuels because they really don't want to carry batteries. Land and fresh water are in short supply. And as we say, batteries aren't the answer to every question. Oh, probably too enthusiastically. You know how big the oceans are. One of the things that we aren't all aware of is that the top layer of the oceans, once you get out beyond, say, the Channel Islands and out in open water, the top layer of the ocean doesn't support photosynthetic life. It doesn't have nutrients in the top layer, but there's plenty of nutrients at the thermocline and all the way to the bottom. Kelp grows near shore because there's plenty of nutrients near shore. As we know, giant kelp grows 1 to 2 feet a day with adequate nutrients. It's easy to process into fuel because one of the things we hear about processing the waste from corn and the waste from wheat and sugarcane is that it's filled with lignin and cellulose, and the kelp does not have that lignin and cellulose. And we can talk about that at some point. And the harvest of giant kelp is non-destructive. So you can harvest it by the haircut method, and then the plant grows back, and we're expecting that the plant will grow back for 7 years before we have to reseed. So the big breakthrough here was to depth cycle the kelp. So we want to tow kelp farms out in the open ocean. So long lines of kelp towed in the open ocean by drone submarines, unmanned drone submarines. The farms would be surfaced during the day because, of course, the farms need sunlight and CO2, and they'd be submerged at night to absorb all those nutrients that are down at the thermocline. And of course, once you're going up and down, we have the advantage that we can get out of the way of big storms and passing ships. So the question was, would this work? And when we talked to marine biologists, they broke about 50-50. Some said, well, we think the kelp needs the sun at the same time as it absorbs the nutrients, and so on and so forth, but we don't really know. As my husband, an inventor, would say, a good experiment is worth 1,000 expert opinions. And so ARPA-E funded an experiment. And so, the experiment worked. But what happens then is that we have this model of the drones we want to build, which have not been built yet. And it's towing this long line of kelp, and it's taking the kelp down to the nutrients at night, and then it's surfacing it during the day. And it just does that again and again and again. And the experiment that ARPA-E did fund ran 104 days. The kelp grew like gangbusters. I don't have all my slides with me today, but the kelp grew like gangbusters. At like day 80, it was longer than the divers were tall that were out there checking it. The contract was with University of Southern California. They were the marine biologists on the team, and they led the research, and then eventually published a journal article. We are the first to depth cycle kelp. And so this is terrific, because then at that point now we can grow abundant kelp in the open ocean without being in the crowded areas of the coastal region, shipping lanes, all the recreational uses, and so on. So, this is a big deal. I'm going to find the escape button. Anyway, so this is the technology that we're looking at. This just shows that we were funded. It was a total of $3 million in a 2-part award. In addition to doing this kelp experiment, which was awesome, we also had funds to design the drone with Gloston. And we had a dynamic modeling firm from Maine. Of course, they would fly out from Maine. And they did dynamic modeling of the design and so on. So the kelp grew 5% per day on the farms. The controls grew fast too, because as we know, this is a really fast growing kelp. So the controls also grew at 3.5% a day. And they were located at the native kelp bed that was the source of the kelp for the experiment. Anyway, a journal article is peer reviewed, and it's in public access. So it doesn't go through a paywall. I think that's all the slides I have. Let me just say that while I'm up here, I brought data that's not on my website because you're here in the audience. Maybe you'd like to hear the data. What we're projecting is a 9-hectare farm per drone, 50 dry metric tons per farm per year. The kelp, by the way, is never dried. It's always, when you're making fuel, you just use it wet in fermentation or digestion. Anyway, but it's still measured as dry metric tons. We're projecting a kelp price of $150 a dry metric ton. The reason that we project that higher price is because a big fraction of the kelp, 29%, is potash. Potash is incredibly valuable and got even more valuable when Russia invaded Ukraine and disrupted all the supply chains. So the soil amendment's valuable. Anyway, so then that leads us to a farm price or farm yield of $67,000 a year in KELP revenue per farm. If we were to farm the oceans adequately, in our view, we'd farm 0.5% of the oceans, 0.5% of all the oceans, which is hard to picture what that's like flying over from here to Japan, but there's huge oceans out there. And we could replace all the fuel for long haul vehicles globally. And just rough estimates here, that's 12 million farms. So, but they're all just diving, submerging, surfacing and submerging, surfacing and submerging, getting harvested 4 times a year. So that's the vision. It's a whole new industry that we really need to build up so that we can supplement all the other things we're doing, like solar and wind and geothermal and all the great things that are going on. And then I'll be here on the panel to take questions.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. Next, we have Nathan.
There we go. So I guess you have to look over there.
Oh.
It looks like the projector just restarted. So anyway, I'll just start. Oyster and mussel farmers are going to be seaweed aquaculture's best friends in California. And first off, I want to start off by talking about why I do what I do, and it's for the next generation. This is my little guy. I want to leave the world a better place for all the tiny little shuckers out there, right? This is why we're all here ultimately, right? So I run and co-own, co-operate Holdfast Aquaculture and then Grassy Oyster Company. And for those of you who didn't get, let's see if this works, didn't get to go on the oyster hatchery tour, this is our hatchery. It's just down the street here. We were founded in 2018. We started with research and development. In 2023, we moved into commercial seed production. I don't know why that's playing sound. Let me see if I can mute it, or maybe whoever's controlling the computer can mute it. Thanks. And in the last few years, we produced over 75 tons of sustainable mussels in the state. And in the last year, actually, we've also acquired Grassy Oyster Company, which is accomplishing this goal of becoming fully vertically integrated. And so this is where research also happens. We do things like breed local species, and we're trying to bring, for example, the pismo clam to market. Grassy Oyster Company, this is up in Morro Bay here. And so what I don't have here, but what I'd like to highlight is that Morro Bay is kind of split in half. Our farm is on this left half, and the right half is a marine protected area. And so we have this incredible ecosystem that we're right up against. And so this is some of our oysters here. And I've got some obligatory wildlife here. And I actually coined this term 5 minutes before this talk, that we're accidentally multi-trophic. You can actually see all this eelgrass here, and this is a leopard shark. A few months ago, the leopard sharks were all over the farm. It's gorgeous stuff out here. We have a 150-acre lease, of which we're allowed to farm about 7 acres. We have around 8,000 bags of oysters, give or take, any time of year. And annually, we produce about 1 million oysters, and we want to up those numbers in the future. But we've got a lot of oysters, and some of you had some of them yesterday at the speakeasy. And so why is this guy so shellfish pilled, right? Like we're at a seaweed festival. What's the whole deal with this guy talking about shellfish? Well, I think all of us have probably seen figures like this, which are showing the benefits of both shellfish and seaweed aquaculture. And basically what you're looking at is if you see green, that's a good place to do shellfish or seaweed aquaculture, depending on the panel. And what I'd like to highlight is California is a green light for both shellfish and seaweed. And there's places to do this all over the place. And I think that shellfish farms are going to be the easiest entry for seaweed aquaculture in California in ocean systems, right? Not necessarily on land. That might be a different story, but for open ocean systems, oyster farms and mussel farms, I think, are going to be your allies. The equipment is already there. We have infrastructure. And again, it's an accidental multi-trophic system. There's all kinds of seaweeds. Here's just one study that shows ova based on gear type here in California farms. And these things are delicious. We aren't allowed to sell them, but we definitely take some home and eat it. It's good stuff. And so I just want to reiterate that we're out there doing this work, and we want to collaborate with people who are interested in seaweed. And the reason I say in California, this is the way it's going to be doable is because this absurdly complicated size 8 font flowchart is how you permit a new farm in California. And this is actually not all of the agencies you'll have to interact with over here as well. You can look at this guide to leasing and permitting, which just came out this year. Awesome document that has been needed for decades in this state. It's finally out, and don't worry, this is all you have to do, right? And so this will take maybe 10 years of your life, probably $1 million, and you'll get a yes or possibly a no at the end of that process. And so I don't want to discourage folks from going through this process, but I do think that you need to pair with folks that are already in the water, and oyster and shellfish farmers in general are in the water. And so imagine, here, I've got one more little bit of video here. This is our oyster farm. This is us doing, our day's work. We harvested, I don't know, 500 dozen this day in this time lapse, and each one of these bags comes out, probably a few hundred bags that we touched that day. Imagine that we were also harvesting seaweed off of that, perhaps in a better fashion than just the accidental fashion, more purpose-built fashion. And instead of just these awesome wines and oysters, you could also get a side of seaweed salad. Like us oyster farmers want to be there. We want to be multi-trophic, just like any good terrestrial farmer wants to diversify their crops, so do we. So that's my spiel. I think that's the last slide. And I'll be sitting on the panel. You can find us or me here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. So next we have Antonio.
Thank you. Yep. We'll see. So thank you for being here. I feel very honored to be in here. My name is Antonio Tovar. I work for the North American Marine Alliance, which is almost 30 years organization. It was working mainly with fisher folks, but we understand the aquaculture is becoming a big, an important issue. So we start to work on aquaculture in something that we call the Atlas, which is a value-based aquaculture. And a lot of what the previous speakers were talking is something that we are in support. I'm coming from Washington, D.C. Most of our work has been on policy, federal policy. And I think that something that you were mentioning about permitting is very different from different places. Like this scale is coming, there's people from Maine who's doing also seaweed over there. And it's a different permitting process. It doesn't take 10 years, probably takes just 2 or 3 years to get in the water. I'm going to be talking about why we think this is important, what values we are thinking that are important in aquaculture, how to improve the process, and then obviously at the end we hope that we get a lot of questions from everybody. So aquaculture is becoming very important because right now we are consuming more of our seafood from aquaculture. But not all aquaculture is the same. There's very positive aquaculture and then some other aquaculture that can be questionable. One of the ones that we have some concerns is specifically finfish farming, which is large fins that they are many times have a very bad impact on the environment, and also it's not necessary for the community that live in those places. Many of these fish are going to export in other places, and it's not very beneficial for some local communities. However, there are many good kind of farming, and I think that the presenters really show some of the positive ways in which aquaculture can be happening. The seaweed commons is the one in Maine that I was mentioning. So what we say about value-based aquaculture, we wanna, we would like to see an aquaculture that is responding to the needs of consumers, that they have access to food that is good and that it's local, that they are protecting the environment. Like, I think that many of what I have seen from the movie, I don't know if some of you went in the screening of the movie about how to improve the environment of the coastal places, and also oysters trying to be reintroduced. It's because aquaculture can be a stewardship of aquaculture. I live in an area in the Chesapeake Bay area where aquaculture was needed because all the oysters and clams in the Chesapeake Bay pretty much were disappearing, and aquaculture was the only solution to repopulate the place in that area. The other thing is that, like also was mentioned, it would be good that it's community-based, that it's really serving the people that live in the place where aquaculture is happening. That is accessible because, again, some aquaculture, it's, or at least some of the arguments to aquaculture is like, we need to feed the world. And if you don't feed the people that live in the same place, then that feeding the world, it really translates into feeding the rich people, not the people that live in that place. That is equitable supply chain, so that it's really benefiting not just the people that is in the sea, but it's also the people that it's in land. That is place-based knowledge. I think that California has talking a lot about that. I get to my 5 minutes, so I have to run. Then that is accountability, that is transparent. So this is something that we are doing, is getting a lot of information from the farmers. I think that that's the main objective, is that the farmers are the ones who leading this process. So I'm going to finish there. And my request is that if you are a farmer, if you are a scientist, if you are a chef, go and answer this survey that is in that code, and that will keep helping to build this atlas. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask all the panelists to come up front, please. All right, I'm going to start with some questions first, and later we're going to open to the public. Because we are here in the Seaweed Festival, we wanted to know, like, what role can seaweed play in restoring coastal ecosystems or supporting biodiversity? Yeah.
Okay, is this on? Can you hear me? Okay, so again, I'm probably one of the least qualified of the three to be talking about seaweed, but a story that I want to tell, in addition to the fact that we have harvestable stuff that biofouls, quote unquote, our oyster farm, is that we also, as you saw in that little shark video, have tons and tons of eelgrass that cohabitates our oyster farm. And so for the scientists that are out there, eelgrass and oyster farm and ocean shellfish farming in general needs to eventually be cohabitable in order for it to reach its full potential. And I do think that it can happen. Morro Bay is now full of eelgrass, and anecdotally, some of it radiated, some of that recovery in Morro Bay radiated off of our farm. And I think everybody here knows, or at least, you know, on average, you guys are way more educated about this. Eelgrass is really, really important for biodiversity. And so it's at this point, we have these anecdotal stories like the ones that I just told you, but we need to get good, hard data sets that show that you can benefit marine protected areas nearby and improve biodiversity through through multi-trophic aquaculture. It happens. I'm telling you for sure. But we just need the science so that we can go to regulators and say, see, you should let us do this here.
I agree. I agree totally, because it's hard to put the metrics around it that we need because the research isn't there yet. But like on my farm, the area of 5 acres of my production didn't exist before that. Like, yes, it's really close or adjacent to natural beds that live on the shoreline, but a lot of times for me, it's a baby salmon. They live within the farm all throughout it, and they feed on the arthropods, and all of the little bugs are swimming around in this kelp that we can't see. And if we could put metrics on what's that doing for the wild return to the streams or for our fishermen, I think that's going to gain a lot of support.
Well, I think that there's clear evidence that a diverse ecosystem is more healthy than a monocrop system. So I think that there is a lot of potential on seaweed. Like you, Cindy, also mentioned, it is not just for the environment, it's also for many other ways in which seaweed can serve us and not depend on things that are not necessarily sustainable.
All right, I have another question. As a general public, how do we best support the growth of sustainable seaweed farming?
Well, you are the consumers. So consumption, and that's why also like chefs are very important. Like yesterday that we were in the, there was this reception, and you can see so many ways in which seaweed can be consumed. So I think that there is, the potential is to consume and consume locally. That's the other thing that is important.
You knew I wanted to say something. I think doing things like this, being here, is a good start. But I think like any political movement, because this is a political movement, it starts with conversations with people that you know in your communities. And so tell people, go back to folks that have never heard a thing about seaweed aquaculture and start those conversations. Ultimately, it comes down to, especially in California, different states, as you mentioned, have different profiles. So I don't want to scare folks away from seaweed aquaculture in general, but in California, it's a tough system. And if we're going to get to the point where we can do this at scale to make real differences, we need political movement, and we need legislative changes that allow us to actually do this at scale. And so I think that starts at the dinner table with those, around the family dinner table conversations, telling the next and previous generations why it's a good thing.
I would just add that when I've been in rooms, this is now me telling something else that I'm not directly familiar with, but in rooms with Noah will say things like, we're importing 95% of our shellfish and finfish and so on that we eat. And it's coming from countries where sometimes it's not regulated. We don't know what types of antibiotics or preservatives or how the fish was filleted and sent to us. It just arrived frozen and we eat it. And, we really ought to take a hard look at growing more shellfish and seaweed and so on our own coastlines, because then we'll know it's there, right? And while a lot of us grimace up here at regulation because, it took us 13 or 14 months to get a research buoy regulated, people that didn't know anything about it go, wow, it took that long. And people that know anything about regulation at all said, you got it done in less than 3 years, and it's like, so it just depends on what your perspective is. But I think bringing home some of this production is really important so that we know, sorry, but whatever's going into that food supply, both for the aquaculture, for the, seaweed and the shellfish, I'm a champion of that.
Yeah, for me, I think it's just being able or being willing. How do I articulate that? Willing to pay a higher price, because a lot of this kelp early on, it's like we're dumping everything that we have into producing this kelp. And without a lot of the support that we have now, which is about to go away in the next couple years, potentially. There's a lot of grant programs in Alaska that are really pushing the envelope and allowing us to do production at the scale we are. But if I had to come into that with just money out of my own pocket, I don't know that I would still be here 10 years later. So the willingness to pay a little bit more, and then like everyone else is saying, we're up against this with wild salmon in Alaska all the time, like making sure that what you're buying isn't farm fish from Norway or something like that. Knowing where your kelp's coming from. And then I think it's more than the dinner table too. There's a lot of biostimulants out there. So instead of, buying a fertilizer for your lawn or your plants, responsibly looking into other options and maybe using some kelp products and helping support this industry.
Yeah, thank you. So next, what is going to happen, we are going to open the questions to the public, and they are going to turn on some microphones that are there. So you just speak out, and we can hear your question. So let's try this. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, good morning. My name is João Macedo. I'm a professional surfer from Nazaré in Portugal. And we're working on actually planting a seaweed farm in just south of the Nazaré, of the break. And I'm lucky enough to be here. This is a great initiative and really inspiring. And so maybe we're trying to put long lines. So we got a license, and I thought that a year and a half was a really long time. And so California, in the US, it's still a bit longer. But I guess putting long lines in the water, it's maybe a more technical question to our friend from Kodiak, in the sense that, we're putting it from the lab. So we have a partner lab just a little bit south. And so I was just wondering, a little bit of the pitfalls of that. We got the license. We've got an event coming up in November, and we're launching. So, but our main goal is habitat. So we're starting from the perspective of creating our farm is a de facto marine reserve. So, but we need to have some kind of yield. We need to have that story to also follow through and to learn about the oysters and all of these complementing things. But maybe just a quick tip on the long line. So we went away from the, that other technique that you showed, and we're just trying to kind of create a border around the 22 hectares that we have licensed. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it really is species specific. I would be happy to talk to you after this about what kind of species you're using, and I could try to give you tips, but I have no, I'd need a little bit more background. I think that there's definitely some ecosystem services like what you're talking about that could be done. We've been playing with the idea of doing one really long line to try to see what kind of production we could get off of that. But outside of that, I'd have to understand the species a little bit better. I think it's 100% doable, and I think it's a great idea. But oh, okay.
So interesting.
Yeah. Paying attention to your weather windows, like that's a better thing for us, and then just really keeping track of all of the different environmental factors that are going into what's happening around you during seeding, during harvest, during monitoring, and then watching the design of your set and making sure it's either staying in that zone that grows kelp well in your area. Probably the most important things.
I want to take a little detour about your question, because I think that it's important, especially for the US, to understand that right now we are in a very difficult moment, because a lot of the US was investing on our food system in the water and inland, and all that investment is at risks right now. And we were going to a really place of sustainability, and right now we might be losing part of that trend, that it was trying to overcome all the damage that we have done with our food system. So I think that your question is very valid, because like all that knowledge that has been accumulated, we need to preserve it some way.
There is another question here from.
Hi. I'll stand. Uh, my name's Marissa. I'm a chef in LA and macroecology enthusiast. Sure. My question is for marine bioenergy. I'm actually wondering what it is that you and your team need to complete your project and what you're looking for. Is it more funding, more notoriety among the public? Do you need more engineers? And I'm just really curious what you guys are looking for to finish your project and really bring it full circle so that it can thrive.
That's a great question. And our area is called hard tech, clean tech. And the hard tech means you got to build something. It's not a computer model. And we, have had a difficult time fundraising. We've been at it for a couple of years and we presented to a number of people. And, it's going to take millions of dollars to get that first drone submarine in the water. You build a carriage, you build a deployment vessel. We can do an ad hoc harvesting with existing vessels and so on. But it takes a certain amount of startup. You just don't want a drone sitting on the beach. It's got to be deployed. It's got to be tested. It takes millions of dollars. The other thing we find in the venture capital world is that they want their payback to start coming in 3 years and they want to be totally bought out in 5 or something. We were really looking for what we call patient money. Emphasis on patience is doing a lot of heavy work there. So we're looking for patient money that sees that this has just tremendous potential and that it's going to take a little while to build it up. In case you're wondering if we've asked the big oil petroleum companies, we have. And right now they're focused on used cooking oil, which is awesome. Get that used cooking oil and turn it into fuel, and it's a molecule that's close to fuel. So for them, it makes a lot of sense. But United Airlines is incredibly frustrated. If you run into Miss Riley, can't think of her first name. Anyway, she'll tell you that you can get 4% of the fuel that United Airlines needs. Never mind all the other airlines flying out of LAX and San Francisco with this used cooking oil. And honestly, Big Oil, if you're in the room, we congratulate you for everything you're doing, but we need more. And Big Oil has taken a victory lap on the 4% fuel they're providing to United Airlines. That's nothing. When I get on a plane, I don't want to feel guilty. I want to just love it because I want it to all be renewable fuel, right? I want to live my life. So when we say to the people that produce the fuel, the jet fuel and so on, we say, hey, we're here. We want to do this with you. We want to work with you. And they have plenty of money. They say things like, oh, we know where you are when we need you. And I'm like, we got to get going now so that 3 years from now, when you realize you need us, we're producing hundreds of thousands of tons and then millions of tons. You can't come to me in 3 years and say, no, I need my 100,000 of tons. I need to start now. And then we need to get all these farms in the water and producing. And we do have an offtake agreement from a group called Macro Oceans that is making biostimulants, which was mentioned for fertilizers and also things for cosmetics. And I believe they're now signing contracts to make alginates, which are derived from brown kelps. So we've got our first offtake contract, but it's not enough to boost us over, right? Okay, that's a long answer, more than you needed, but you get the idea of what the environment's like. And, thank you for the question. Yes.
Analysis, your first test?
Oh, the first test was on Catalina Island, and USC has the Wrigley Marine Field Station out there. And, I'm distracted because one of the giants in kelp is sitting here in the room. I'm going to call him out. It's Charlie Arish. And so I hope that you get to see him today while he's here. He's from the East Coast, and we're nice to see you, Charlie. Anyway, yeah, so we worked off Catalina Island. One of the things we know about those islands is they're built like mountains, so the water gets deep really quick. So we anchored in deep water. The marine biology team from USC verified that there were no nutrients in the top layer, and they checked many times a year. And then we depth cycled, and we did that off a buoy. RPE would not pay for a drone, and but they paid for this big anchored buoy, and it was a big deal. It had a big marine winch on it. It had an automated buoy controller that emails my husband all the time. It's like his new girlfriend. And anyway, so yeah, and so the marine biologist helped seed the line, and then they checked the line and weighed and measured everything and published the article. And so basically, our firm did the engineering and they did the marine biology, and it was great partnership. Not until the next round of funding comes along. I mean, we've got the buoy, and then anyway, so yeah, thank you though for the question.
There is a question there on the left, yeah. Yeah, hi.
I've done a lot of work in green economy, and as I've been learning more and more about the blue economy pieces, I see a lot of the same type of thing happening with silos of things, and just looking to see how there can be more collaboration, or almost like, you know, in natural products. Organic Valley took multiple farmers and then brought them together as a co-op so that they could actually create a market and, you know, make themselves financially viable. Are there any efforts like that in the space that you're aware of?
We just finalized a 5-farmer cooperative in Kodiak last weekend. So. And Greenwave. Big shout out to Greenwave. Thank you.
I think Kendall has a question.
Yeah, hi. My name is Kendall. I work with Greenwave, a nonprofit that supports farmers across the coast, US and Canada. I've heard a lot from the stage about, or sort of reading between the lines, there's a lot of kind of innovation and opportunity in California. And I've seen that on the like business development side, like product development. You mentioned Macro Oceans, some other companies. I've also heard a lot about the cost of doing business in California. And Nate, you pointed out the like wild permitting process that you really had to sort of take over an existing lease in order to get into the space. We haven't heard from Rafel, who through Cal Poly Humboldt started a farm in Humboldt Bay, growing kelp, growing sugar or bull kelp and other species. And I heard you over here on the side talking about your lease costs. And I think it's really important to sort of highlight like the, not just the regulatory kind of hurdles that prospective farmers have to go through, but the just baseline cost of doing business. And lease costs in Humboldt Bay, which are like the only place where new farms have developed for seaweed farming, it can cost thousands of dollars for a single acre in a year, like $4,000 to $6,000, versus in Connecticut, $25 an acre for a farm site for an entire year. So like those are really, really out of whack, right? What can we kind of learn from other places and like learn from Alaska? What do we need to be doing here? And how can we kind of impact not just the regulatory system, but the like cost of doing business to make it possible? So we don't just have to go offshore in federal waters. Like I understand that as a scale, if you're looking at sustainable aviation fuels, like you're not going to do that in nearshore environment. But if you want to create businesses and opportunities that are close to town and easy to get to, and you're not spending a lot of time and fuel to go and operate your farm site, like how do we do that here? Where can we pull some lessons from Alaska?
Yeah, I've got something to say to that. And you might have noticed on my slides that I said we ran 150 plus acres and we farmed 7 of them. And the reason that we do that is because we want the opportunity to expand into those 150 acres. But if we don't take that, then they would come up for lease for somebody else. But it's a multi-year process to get things working. So right now we're starting a 3-year track record of water quality just to get them those other acres slated for potentially applying for an expansion. And then I've got to go through Coastal Commission, CDFW, CEQA, all this stuff. And so it's just, even if you already have a lease, I have, 143 at least acres that I could potentially be farming in. It's no guarantee that you can actually utilize that space. And so that's the problem you're referencing. And on top of that, I'm paying for 143 acres that I can't use, right? And so that's a problem. And like I said earlier, I think it comes down to some sort of legislation that needs to be passed in order to streamline this process. And so how do we get there? I was meeting with World Wildlife Foundation last week to talk about scales of economy in aquaculture. And they just got an investor through WWF to take all of the regulators and the legislature for the state that wanted to. They took them to New Zealand and they said, here you go. This is what we're talking about doing. These New Zealand farmers are farming thousands and thousands of acres. And we're talking about permitting farms that are 10 acres, 40 acres. And this is the scale that it could grow into. But right now we're talking about starting small and sustainable and local and doing it in a safe way. And I was like, when can we do that for California? I think it's going to take something like that. We need to get, yeah, our lawmakers behind this process here. And the problem is that we say, like, you know, everybody in here knows that we have this multi-billion-dollar seafood deficit, and then you look at the generation of wealth from seafood farms in California, and we're talking not chump change, hundreds of millions of dollars, especially a lot of it from Humboldt, most of it really, most of that value comes from there. But that doesn't mean a lot to somebody that's looking at, you know, billion-dollar almond industry in Central California, right? But it could be that size. And we need to educate our lawmakers to say, we're small right now, but it's because of these limitations. And I think that piece is next. We gotta have that trip to New Zealand or equivalent.
I want to second what you say, because definitely the regulation can impact the costs. So, like, just put a very quick example in the Chesapeake Bay again, the way in which oyster farmers are competing between Maryland and Virginia is completely different, and it has to do a lot with the leasing. The lease in Maryland, you can only lease 2-3 hectares of bay bed versus as many as you want in Virginia. And then there's a very unequal competition because the cost in Maryland is much higher than the cost in Virginia. So,
yeah. Lastly, I would say just like participating in things like this. Thank you guys all for being here. I think it's super important. The social licensing aspect is like vastly overlooked too. And before the legislation, I just keep doing these kinds of things because anything near shore is something you can see. And when you live in somewhere as densely populated as California, then that causes a lot of issues. Like not everybody wants to look at buoys. And so for me, it's been, you know, getting away from something orange and making it black that's not like right in your face, but at the same time, you want people to know it's there so they're not driving over it. So like figuring out creative ways to do that, and then just really highlighting the services that you're providing and the number of jobs and involving indigenous communities and thinking about all of those things because they're all going to matter for support from the public.
Oh, yeah, Charlie.
You know, one of the biggest drawbacks that I see for California has to do with California. And this attitude where, well, we need to have change in the regulatory structure, but I think folks who are very interested need to work on both sides of the aisle, give each side of the aisle the information they need to move a simple piece of legislation through the legislature and signed by the governor. When I set up seaweed farming on the East Coast, the first state to do it was Connecticut. I made sure that I had one of my doctoral students working with Democrats and another one working with Republicans. I worked with the governor directly, and we got the legislation passed in 8 months. And that's why it's only $5, very cheap. $45 at most, the license fee, and it's acceptable to do it. So I think it's really imperative if California wants to get on the map, got to look at that political situation, because the technology right now for the US to develop all aspects of seaweed farming is no longer fiction, it's available. What we need is markets, we need the regulatory structure in the states, because we have 32 states on the coast. Each one has the capacity to do things, but each state will have to develop that regulatory structure as quickly as possible. And you can't always depend upon grants doing things. You just really got to say, this is our main focus. Yeah. By the way, I'm representing here a couple different entities, Green Wave Organization, as well as Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and the University of Connecticut. So,
I have a couple questions for you. When are you moving to California to do that here? But what the second one, the serious one, is what entity did you do the lobbying through? Because as a private business, that becomes a little bit tricky sometimes.
I mean, what we did was through my lab, I also worked with another organization, It's called Save the Sound. I was also the science co-chair of the EPA Long Island Sound Programs Office, so I knew the coastal managers. But it was critical to have sitting down with both sides of the aisle, giving them a very simple piece of legislation to get it passed. And we didn't make it complicated. It was less than a page. And that was, and the governor said he would sign it if we were able to get it through the legislature. And we did that. And we did it in less than a year. But that's, it require, a few people that will devote their time to do it. You have a lot of good NGOs that have national, international reputations. WWF is behind you. I actually trained Paul Dobbins in WWF. He was my first ocean farmer in the Gulf of Maine. You've got the TNC who are doing wonderful things. Again, all open source. They're there as a major resource, but you've got to have the folks in California talking to both sides of the aisle with a simple piece of legislation.
I think this is so important, but I just want to tell a quick story that of talking about educating people, right? I'm talking to Cassidy Teufel, who many of you know is one of the big players at Coastal Commission. Awesome guy to work with, got to be patient. And I say to Cassidy, one of the professors we're working with is looking at sterile hybrids of kelps for various reasons. I won't go into right this minute, but anyways, could be very helpful to us. And I said, is it going to be hard to get permitted sterile hybrids of kelp? And Cassidy says, oh, the shellfish people are deploying right now sterile hybrids of various shellfish. It's working out great. So they've definitely paved the way for us to seriously consider. And I went, oh, look, we're building on top of work that's already been done by the shellfish farmers. Cassidy's already receptive to the discussion. I don't have to lay all the groundwork. He sees a lot of positives. And so this is where, all of us on a stage are helping each other over time. And I just loved having that response because I love seeing the communities build on each other and in a way we're working together when we don't even know it,
I think there is one more question over there.
As ordinary citizens, who are our advocates? Who can we write to on your behalf to make this happen?
Well, for shellfish growers, there's the Pacific Coast Shellfish Growers Association. It's a mouthful of an acronym, PCSGA, but that's our lobbying arm in the shellfish world. I honestly would kick that to the seaweed folks for the equivalent for seaweed.
I probably don't know because
There's not.
there's not. Talk to Greenwave. But we don't have the same kind of organization. The one thing I will say is as a community member, I write letters in support of people doing ocean farming. So they let us know through, it's not a great organized network, but through word of mouth, so to speak, email word of mouth, that they're going to be in front of Army Corps, they're going to be in front of Coastal Commission, could we write letters of support or show up in support. And so that's the kind of thing I do. And I do that for people that are writing, grant proposals and things like that. So, just to say, hey, we're here, we support these people. And a lot of what I'm also supporting is the development of kelp and seaweed nurseries and so on, because when the time comes to deploy farms that have kilometers of long line, I'm depending on those nurseries, and sometimes there'll be shellfish nurseries to produce the seaweed long line sporulins. And so, we all do need to work together. We're not just the shellfish or the seaweed or it really is an interleaved industry that's developing, but it's just developing more slowly than many of us would like. So, basically writing letters and showing up. How do we get the word out? That's an excellent question.
All right, I think that's it. That's all the time that we have. There is another panel after this. They're going to be around. So if you have any questions further, you can find them around. Let's give a round of applause, please.